So in this demo, we will implement a new API that will allow us to create a new image group. To do this, we need to add a post method for our groups resource, implement the Lambda function that implements this functionality, and deploy the new version of our API. Now, because we need a third-party library to generate a UUID, I have created a JavaScript project. We then will download all the dependencies for this project, create a zip archive, and deploy it to AWS Lambda. Now, the only dependency that we need is UUID that we will use to generate random IDs, and we also add the AWS SDK dependency, which is needed only as a development dependency during the development time. I've also created a template for our handler, which at the moment just imports AWS and UUID libraries, creates an instance of a DynamoDB client, and gets the name of our groups table from an environment variable. So now, just before we start, think about where the name and description for the new group will come from. So of course it will come from the HTTP request that is sent by a user of our application. And to access this data, we need to parse the body of the request. Now, the body of a request can come in any format, but the easiest way is to pass the request as a JSON. So we can just parse this body using the JSON.parse. All right, and then to create a new DynamoDB item, we also need to generate an ID, just as we've talked about in the previous video. To do this, we need to use the UUID library and call the v4 method to generate a random UUID. And there are multiple versions like v1 that allows us to use different algorithms to generate UUIDs. Okay, so now we have our parsed body that represents a new group that we want to create. And all we need to do is to write an item to DynamoDB. So let's first define the item that we will write. And it will contain the ID attribute, which is a partition key in our table. And the value of the ID will be item ID, the random UID that we have generated in line 11. And then we need just to take all the parameters that came from the user request in a parsed body and add them to this new item. What we could do, we could just do something like this: name, parsed body, name, and then do the same for the rest of the fields. But there is a shortcut in JavaScript as well that looks like this: ... parsed body. So it will just copy all fields from parsed body to this new JavaScript object. And you may wonder, are we going to allow a user to pass just any objects and just store them into DynamoDB? Well, at the moment, yes, but in the next lesson, we will see how we can validate incoming requests. So let's just focus on writing new items to our table. Now we want to put a new item into a DynamoDB table. And to do this, I will call the put method. And this put method expects two parameters: the table name, which is groups table, and the item that we want to write, which is new item. And to use await as before, we need to call the promise method. And everything looks fine. The only thing that is left is to return the HTTP reply. And it should contain status code, which will be 201, which means created. It will contain course headers, just as before. And it will contain the body of a reply, which is a new item that we added to DynamoDB, converted into a string.